Another example is segregation. Segregation is perhaps more extreme than assimilation. Segregation is basically the separation of people from different cultures or even races in public spaces and services. So we can see, like in the image that we have in this slide, that this was something that was very much present in the United States, in the southern states of the United States, from the end of slavery in the late 1800s up until the year 1964. This was also present in the apartheid period of South Africa, right up until the year 1991. So this is an approach that isn't so much in the past. These two are both examples of de jure or legal segregation. That means that there were laws, there were policies that physically separated people from, in this case, different races. So in the USA, it was a separation of white people and African American people. Similarly, in South Africa, it was a separation of the white European settlers and the native African community. So these are two examples that are basically based on race, based on physical characteristics that would assign people to a certain race. So these are both examples of de jure segregation. But we can also have de facto segregation, which in fact we see a lot even today, even in the most supposedly multicultural societies. De facto means that it's not legal, but that's the way things tend to be. And we see this a lot in Britain, for example. There are schools that are very much predominantly white, and there are schools where there are more Asian communities. This is not a legal separation, but it is a de facto segregation that has its roots in a history of inequality, segregation, and historical areas in which communities would settle. So what are the issues with this approach to multiculturalism? Well, firstly, there is an obvious preference for the majority culture. Despite people at the time saying that this was not discrimination or an exclusion, this was merely a separation, we have seen that this means that the spaces for the majority or dominant culture were much, much better, much superior to the spaces reserved for the minority culture. This also leads to a very unfair distribution of services. So the schools in the white areas would have much more services, much more facilities, much more money invested in them than the schools in the African American communities. And of course, this leads to discrimination. This separation of people, this division between peoples, creates a very uncomfortable feeling and unfairness and prejudice. If you are told that you must be separate from another group of people, then you start to think there are reasons for that. So from the majority culture, there has been a lot of discrimination against minority cultures in times of segregation. Like we can see in the image, help wanted, white only. That is a form of discrimination related to prejudice that was really promoted by the idea of segregation.